This portrait, and I guess you could call it a portrait here, is called Woman One by William de Kooning. And I put this quote here by him. It's not that I'm asking you to memorize it in any way. I just thought it was a really good quote to capture kind of the essence of this series of paintings that he does on women. And it's just beauty becomes petulant to me, kind of like childish or moody, and I like the grotesque. It's more joyous. Even remembering, if you could, again, you don't have to, the last two parts, like I like the grotesque, it's more joyous, to me is so interesting, a view that he has when he is painting women in particular. So let's go ahead and take a look at context here. First of all, de Kooning is an abstract expressionist artist. And so abstract, if you take that two term label apart, abstract, of course, art pieces where the objects do not look naturalistic, and expressionism always is about expressing one's emotions. Now, he's part of a particular type of abstract expressionist artist called gesture painting or action painting, where the paint is added in a spontaneous manner. Kind of getting more into that, it's meant to kind of, or it's coming from your subconscious. Like your actions aren't controlled by you necessarily, they're controlled by something that is beyond your reality. And then you apply the paint in a very action based manner. So Jackson Pollock, who is also a gesture painter or action painter, would twist and turn his body in a splatter painting technique. De Kooning is more pick up the brush, pick up the paint, and almost like hit the canvas in all different directions. It's a very, almost a violent way of painting. So that's gesture painting, action painting, kind of getting your body involved, really doing it in a spontaneous, subconscious manner as you express yourself through abstract art. And then he's also part of something called the New York School of Artists. And that would be dancers and painters and writers, and they were painting in New York at the time, and I think influenced by surrealism, doing these more avant-garde or new and risk-taking views of traditional subjects. This particular series and this painting in particular took a long time, and you wouldn't think that looking at it. Um, it feels very kind of spontaneous, which it was. But what I mean by taking years to paint, it was like he'd paint it and like, oh, no, 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 this isn't right. And kind of scrape off the paint and then paint it again in a very forceful manner and then scrape that off. And so the canvas is just taking a beating. He roughed up the canvas, sometimes even punching holes in a canvas with that. So that's what I mean by it took a long time, even though the individual like representation didn't take too long, he wouldn't be happy with it, and then he'd wipe it away and start again. One of the things that comes up in terms of historical context with this, since this was painted more in the 1950s, I think it was 1950 to 1952, this is after the time of World War II. And soldiers coming back from war, and you had women being presented during this time in media, like in film with Marilyn Monroe, or print media, which is like the pinup girls, and lots of makeup and hair done. And it was just this kind of sexualization of women. And I think de Kooning was using those as inspiration. Now, what he's saying about it is kind of up for grabs and a little bit of a controversy. Some saying he's taking on a very misogynistic view of women, meaning, a hatred of women, depicting them in a very aggressive kind of violent way. And others may take more of a line that he's kind of critiquing the way women are depicted in the media. So, I don't have the correct answer for you. You can kind of interpret that as you would, but there's been kind of talk about both things. Now, don't look at this and have that talk amongst yourself like, well, I could do that, or why is this? He has no real art skills. He is an incredibly skilled artist. He can draw very well, was an academically trained artist, and I'll show you one of his drawings at the end of the slideshow. Content is pretty simple. The brushstrokes clearly are obvious. They're aggressive. They're in all different directions. There are thick areas of paint. There's areas where the paint drips. There's just kind of this randomness and aggression and violence to the brushstrokes part. And then you add on the colors to it, which clash and are incredibly kind of bold and bright and almost an assault on the eyes. You get this in just starting to get this impression of women. And then she's seated, which comes from a tradition of how women are depicted. Usually they're reclining nude figures, or the seated woman typically is associated with the religious female, like a Virgin Mary holding Jesus on her lap, like that sadist Sempienche or Theotokos image from the Middle Ages. So that association is interesting, to have the traditional manner of the seated female figure be mostly religious. And now you have this. Is the icon now the religious icon of a female, more her sexuality? Her eyes stand out, her mouth and her teeth stand out, her breasts stand out. And I think back to fertility figures from the prehistory era and the influence of Picasso here with the breaking down of the female figure and the space around her as well. And it's almost difficult to tell where the background begins and ends, and her body then takes over. It's an interesting kind of connection between her and the background space. It's definitely a flattened space, but her body does stand out, but just barely. And so I think you kind of feel, and this is that duality of interpretation, the desire for the female and the lust for her because of what he emphasizes, yet frustration, anxiety, perhaps mistrust, and all these things are very kind of conflicting ideas that comes through with this art piece. So let me just show you a couple, the other two in the series. I think he painted like 6 or so of the woman series, just so you could see others in the series that he did during this time period in 1950s. And then in the middle is the drawing. And I chose this one because it is the female. So to see a drawing of his with a more naturalistic looking female figure, I think was just important to see. And how he then leans into this more abstract view of the woman versus the more traditional. So function, formal qualities. Function, aesthetic, this different way of depicting, I mean, can we even call it beauty? I don't know. Just the different way to suggest a way to view the traditional female form. So aesthetic, a portrait, yes. Who she is in particular, we don't know, but it's just a portrait of a woman. So you could do portrait as well. Could it be social commentary? Yes, you could. And then for formal quality, definitely texture. And the texture is kind of goes along with that brush strokes there. You see the brush strokes, you see the texture, you can also do variety with the variety of lines and the variety of ways the paint is applied, and some of the areas are thick, some are thin, some are splatters, some are drips, some are just solid brush strokes. It gives that sense of anxiety, and it kind of vibrates with energy here. Now, what that energy is the question. So again, that is Woman One by abstract expressionist William de Kooning from the 1950s.